Anyway, so for the last 27 years, since I had an operation, every doctor that I saw said virtually the same thing. They look at my medical records and they say, you realize you shouldn't be here. Everybody that looks at my all the stuff that had happened, they all look up and and I can predict after a while what they say, you shouldn't be here. It's just so much is going on. So I wanted to kind of go back and kind of give a little more context to how all this stuff started. I'm now going to my bullet points. The first blessing that God gave me, I had just returned from Vietnam, and a neighbor up the street brought her sister down to my house. Her name was Terry. We fell in love with each other at first sight, and that was the first blessing that God placed in my, besides letting me live through Vietnam. but Terry was just an angel from the start, and we had wonderful beginnings. Shortly we were married after we met, and as time got on, she got a little restless, and she decided that she wanted to do some work during the day. While I was out selling insurance at the time, and she was kind of bored sitting at home. She says, I think I'd like to go sell insurance with you. And so we went down to the Metropolitan Life Insurance office, and she took her test and so forth. And we were coming back up Little Creek Road after her test, and as some of you may remember, the coal trains used to come through Ward's Corner, and there's maybe 200 car trains, and they'd stop traffic for 15-20 minutes while somebody said, well, we're sitting here in this traffic, and we were on the east side of Little Creek Road just before Granby Street, and we looked over and we're just looking around for what to do, and Terry said, well, there's a pet shop over there that we've never seen before, so why don't we kill time and just go into the pet shop and look around, so we walked into the pet shop, and it was the most beautiful pet shop you've ever seen. Little canopies over the dogs were behind glass cages, and the canopies over it, and it was just idyllic. It was just the most beautiful pet shop you've ever seen. And we told the old gentleman sitting at the counter how much we liked the shop. And he kind of cockily said, well, if you like it so much, why don't you buy it? so I'm up for a good joke, so I said, sure, I'll buy it. And just kidding. Sure, I'll buy it. And he says, well, come on back. Let me show you the books. I was too embarrassed to admit that I was only kidding. So we followed him down the hall to this little paneled office in the back, and he opened up the books, and all of a sudden we said, this is a pretty good little business. So we said, well, let's try to buy this place. This is then we'll be working together, all day, every day, and so forth. So anyway, he set the price, and it was reasonable, and so I was in my early 20s then, and I had no idea about running a business or how curious banks were about your financial condition when you wanted to go borrow money. So we proceeded to apply to banks to get the money to buy the place and some working capital. And we got turned down and turned down and turned down and turned down. And we were just crushed. And so it was the day before we were supposed to close on the sale, and we found ourselves standing in front of the shop, having to go in and admit to the guy that we couldn't arrange for the financing to purchase the pet shop. And it's about 2:30 in the afternoon. We look across the street, and there's a little bank across the street that we had called on, right directly across the street, crosswalk from the shop to the bank. And so we were so desperate, we said, okay, let's try it. And back then, as most of you remember, banker's hours, the banks closed at 2 in the afternoon. It was already 2:30. But we were desperate, so we went across the street and we knocked on the locked bank door. Knock, knock, knock. And miracle of miracles, the head teller was still in there clearing his till. And he recognized, he was a neighbor from my neighborhood over in Lawson Forest. And he came over and opened the locked door. And he took me over to the bank manager's office and introduced me to the bank manager. And the bank manager, he said, why are you here, you know, and so forth. And we explained to him that we really wanted to buy that pet shop across the street. And he took a liking to us and didn't ask us all the questions, mean old questions that the other banks did. He just said, okay, yeah, I'll give you the loan. And so that banker was Gordon Dozier.
Oh my God!
Yes, Gordon Dozier. And Gordon was a member of a prayer group that was meeting, it was pre-New Creation Community at that time, and they were meeting in various places and so forth. So we went to a few prayer meetings then. But Gordon has been in my life to this day. Gordon and I we virtually interact every day. So Gordon got us started, and we had a good relationship with the bank, you know, for a while, and so.
Just as a point of context for
Yes.
John,
Yeah.
I was baptized
And
with one of his
George
kids.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Gordo now has 8 kids, and many grandchildren and so forth, spread all over the place. But anyway, so Gordo and I have known each other and have stayed in touch. So to kind of fast forward, now I'm selling advertising. Gordo has gone on to manage, he's a financial manager at private schools like Norfolk Academy, Savannah Day School, the Westminster School in Atlanta, and Greensboro Country Day down in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I was in the advertising business, selling advertising, and most of you know that advertising involves quite a bit of barter. When you sell advertising, all the stuff that you see advertised on The Price is Right, or if you hear the radio station, they're giving away tickets or prizes or whatever, or trips. That's all barter. They trade it for airtime and so forth. So I had been doing advertising trades with my advertising clients, and we decided to start a barter company. And barter had just become legalized and formalized with the government. So we basically, barter companies had the same legal status as a bank or a credit card company, and a third-party record keeper. So we decided we wanted to start one, and I said, well, gee, I know about selling, but I don't know anything about running a bank. Do we know a banker, you know, that we could talk to? And Terry says, well, why don't you invite the Doziers? Gordon, they were managing the school in Greensboro, but they came back to this area frequently to see family and friends and so forth. So anyway, Gordon and Eva came over to dinner the next night, and she says, go ahead and ask him if he wants to, you know, come in with us. And I understand Gordon was very successful in managing schools and so forth, and is very conservative and so forth. So I said, Terry, he's not gonna want to do that. She said, ask him. I said, okay, we'll ask him. So Gordon and Eva came over, and the family came over. The whole family was there. Big van full of kids, and I gave Gordon a pitch. You know what I wanted to do. We wanted to start this barter bank, but I needed somebody who knew how to run a bank. You know, and do all the bookkeeping, and we had Laffer curves, all kinds of stuff, you know, to keep the financial, because you're really creating a new currency. So Gordon said, no, I don't think that's, you know, right for me, you know, and they piled into the car after dinner and headed back to Greensboro. And Terry, as soon as I shut the door, I says, I told you so, you know. I knew he would want to do that. Well, anyway, on the way back to Greensboro, the family falls asleep in the van. Gordon is sitting there driving, you know, the 4.5 hours to Greensboro, and just kind of mulling over the dinner conversation. I got a call the next morning, and all of a sudden, another miracle of miracles, Gordon was wildly excited about the idea, and it actually scared me. I said, something's happened to Gordon, because it was just not in his nature, to want to do something. So it was such a break from, because I was wild and crazy, and he was, solid and conservative and thoughtful, and I says, something's wrong. He said, do you really understand what we're talking about doing? Anyway, he quit his job in Greensboro. Came up here, bought a house on Granby Street, right next to the DePaul Hospital, and we drove up to Maine to purchase I've actually already purchased, but we went up to Maine to see this software package that we were going to use in action. There was a trade exchange I used that I bought it from, and he wanted to see how they were doing. So anyway, Gordon and I are driving up to Maine together, and on the way we're discussing our relationship. 50-50 partnerships are very notorious for falling apart because it's hard to get that dynamic well. So there's a miracle that we survived that. That's another plus. So we decided that we had to be prayerful in our daily group. That was one of the first things we decided, that we could probably survive if we had a conflict, if we took it to prayer before we came to blows when between the two of us. And we also had to decide at the same time what our titles would be, since we were 50-50 partners. And we decided that Gordon would be president because he owned a suit. He had been wearing a suit and tie for his whole life, and so I didn't have a suit. And so Gordon is president. I was the vice president and marketing guy. And so we drive up there, and on the way up, I've been having gallbladder problems, which, some of y'all had experienced when I was at New Creation, where I had problems with my gallbladder, and I ate a hamburger at the ferry going up at Cape May, and got a gallbladder attack, and I was just in incredible pain. So we go up there. Gordon sees that I'm pretty much dying. We drive back. The next morning we go to our office that we'd rented on James Boulevard, and we were loading the program into the computer. And I said, Gordon, I got to go to the hospital. I'm really, really, really sick. And so I go in the hospital, go in, have a gallbladder operation. And after the operation, they pat me on the rump and say, you're going to be fine. Everything's going to be fine. And so that was the day before Thanksgiving. Christmas Eve, I kept getting progressively sicker, for that month. And Christmas Eve, nothing would go down. I couldn't even keep water down. I'd swallow water and it just wouldn't go down. So I go to the hospital and they said, oh, you just got the flu, go home. Christmas Day, I nearly died. I was just in agony. So the next day, the day after Christmas, I go to the hospital and they do a CAT scan and discover that I have a 2-liter cyst inside my pancreas, and the size of a football. And that's why nothing was going down. It was blocking everything. So they did a needle biopsy of the fluid, and they said, oh, it's staph, and so they said, well, we got to operate right away. We can't let this happen. And they said, say your goodbyes. They were quite serious about it. And they said, may not survive, because when the membrane my pancreas was so, they said as soon as we cut it, it may explode. And virtually it did. As soon as they made the incision, my pancreas just phew, and I was covered with 2 liters of staph-infected muck inside my gut, and went into septic shock, and over the course of 5 weeks, I was on life support. All my bodily functions had quit. My kidneys were in failure. I just shut down. Everything was shut down. So finally, after several weeks in ICU, the doctors came to my wife and said, you know, how long are you going to let this go on? He's not going to come back. He says, less than 5% of people survive a necrotized pancreas, you know, because the pancreas, 90% of my pancreas was removed from the infection. And so they said, yeah, he's not going to survive. It's time to take him off life support and, you know, let him go. And so they sent the chaplain in to Terry. She was reluctant to, you know, to pull the plug, but she had gone home. She says, I went home and she says, I like in the Bible, she says, I wailed before the Lord. She didn't know what to do. And she said, as clearly as she's ever heard God speak to her, he said, it's not his time, he's got things to do. And so she went back to the hospital and told the doctors, well, it's not his time, he's going to be fine. Yeah, he's got things to do. Well, they thought she was a Looney Tune and had thought that maybe she was hanging on because we hadn't had a formal goodbye. And so they said, I was in a morphine coma. They kept me sedated. So the doctors said, look, I know you want to say goodbye to your husband and so forth. So they said, we will wake him up, bring him out of the coma, and you can say your goodbyes, and then we'll let him go. And she said, no. He says, it's going to be fine. He says, if it's his time, it's his time. You know, we all have to graduate. As Terry refers to passing on as graduating. As he says, we all have to graduate. If it's his time, he'll be out of pain, he'll be in a better place. But God has told me that he's fine, he's going to be okay. And so they sent the chaplain in, and the chaplain comes to my wife. She's standing across me, either side of the bed. I've got machines. You can hardly get near me. I had so many tubes and machines and stuff. So anyway, he tells Terry that your husband doesn't want to go on. You know, he's tired and he wants to give up. And Terry says, how would you know that? He's got a trach and he's been in a coma all this time. He says, you don't know that, you know. And she said for the first time in 5 weeks, she actually started crying because she was so upset that this pastor, the church chaplain, the hospital chaplain, would tell her that. And so she said, and I don't remember this, this is all related to me. She said, I opened my eyes for the first time in weeks, and since I had a trach, I couldn't say anything, but I mouthed the word pray. And she says, well, see, he wants you to pray. So the chaplain said a prayer and left the room. And the next day, a priest arrives to give me last rites. And Terry said, well, it was the most handsome priest she's ever seen. Tall, dark, handsome, stunning. And we just assumed that someone, Daryl or someone from the community had called the priest in, you know, because clearly I was on death's door. And so Terry said, well, last rite's fine, but would you mind saying a prayer of healing for me, you know, for Vic? And at the time I was, because my kidneys were failing, I was getting dialysis treatment when he came in the room. A dialysis nurse was standing at the foot of the bed, and she said, please pray a prayer of healing. And he said the most beautiful prayer she's ever heard. The dialysis nurse was bawling, and the Holy Spirit was just so heavy in the room. And so he goes out. 3 days later, I come out of the coma, and I had been going down, and all my vital signs just started turning. It was miraculous. It was the most amazing recovery. So anyway, just shorten it a little bit. After I got out of the hospital and had recovered, I had to learn to walk again. And I was in a wheelchair, and kids had to lift me up. I couldn't get out of bed. Every time I needed to roll over, I had to put my hand up, and Terry would move me, and she'd have to wipe my rear end. She did virtually everything for me. I was totally an invalid. So anyway, as I recovered, we went back to the hospital to thank all the nurses and the doctors and so forth, for their heroic treatment of me. And then we went to find the priest, and we went to, Darryl said, well, we didn't send him, And so we started going to the local churches, thinking the closer parishes might have sent over. Well, no one knew this priest. No one could find the priest that had come in and said this beautiful prayer. So we are believing that that was an angel that God sent, and so that has really changed my life in the sense that I know that if I die on the way home tonight, I will die a happy camper, because God has been giving me just an incredible gift of healing and so forth. So that's the big thing, and it really has changed my outlook on virtually everything that happens to me now. We all say, oh, well, it's God's will, and God showed us that, because as we went on with the business, there were many miracles that kind of came out of that situation. Because when we first started the Barter Authority, I still had to learn to. I could walk a short distance, but I couldn't. We opened it at a business trade show, which was a 3-day event at the Coliseum, at the convention center, and I couldn't stand for more than a few minutes, and I certainly couldn't walk up the end of an aisle. So I was in a wheelchair. So all of our first clients met me for the first time in a wheelchair. So they got to see as I started to learn to walk again, and so they got to see that miracle, and so it gave us the opportunity to tell the testimony to many, many, many people. And it is, obviously people had different needs to hear different things, but he's given me the opportunity to share God's gift of miracles and to give them hope. Many people have come to me and said, gee, I needed to hear that story because I've got some relative in the hospital or whatever, and so we have been blessed by the opportunity to share, what God can do in desperate situations and so forth. And that's not to say, I always have to say that if it's our time, if I had died, then that would have been God's will too. I understand that I've been given a special gift for some reason, and that's why I started it with why am I here. I'm hoping that I'm responsive to the opportunities that God places in front of me to share that story or share, what I've learned. So I'm guessing that that's the reason that God has let me be here, in spite of what the doctors are saying. You really shouldn't be here. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the story. To this day, I'm still a walking miracle in the sense that Agent Orange from Vietnam has decimated, no, not decimated, getting to my Latin, decimated is only 10%, yeah. All the cumulative effects of the Agent Orange have taken their toll, and so still the doctors are saying, yeah, you're doing pretty good, the fact that you're still alive, because I'm in kidney failure, I'm seeing the cardiologist, my eyes have gone, I get needles in my eye every few weeks to maintain my eyesight. So, I've got a lot of issues, but I am the happiest person you can imagine because God has blessed me with another day of life. And so, Terry and I see miracles virtually every day now in our marriage. Just the fact that I'm alive here is the biggest miracle of all. So.